The water between the Bahamas and the Florida coast is a particular shade of blue. It shifts with the light, turquoise in the shallows, indigo where the bottom falls away. In November, the air is warm but not oppressive. The hurricane season has passed. The trades blow steady. It is considered one of the best times to sail. The distance between islands can be deceptive. From one point of land, another may be visible on the horizon, a low smudge of green. But the space between is open ocean. The Gulf Stream moves through this region, carrying warm water north. Currents are strong. Navigation requires attention. The sea, even when calm, is not forgiving of error. In 1961, recreational sailing was becoming more accessible. Families with means and interest could charter vessels for extended trips. The Bahamas were a popular destination, close to the US mainland, warm, relatively safe. The infrastructure was modest. Communication between boats and shore was limited. Once a vessel left port, it moved through a kind of silence. This was the environment into which the ketch Bluebelle sailed in early November. The water was clear. The weather was favorable. There was no indication in those first days of anything unusual. Terry Jo Duperrault was an optometrist from Green Bay, Wisconsin. He was 41 years old, methodical, and drawn to the water. He had sailed since his youth and spoke often of the sea as a place of freedom. His wife, Jean, was supportive but less experienced. They had 3 children, Brian, 14, Terry Jo, 11, and Renee, 7. Arthur had long planned a sailing vacation with his family. It was not impulsive. He researched charters, studied routes, and prepared his children as best he could. Brian had sailed with him before. Terry Jo and Renee were less familiar with the mechanics of a boat, but they were eager. The trip was meant to be educational, bonding, and restorative. In early November 1961, the family traveled from Wisconsin to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Arthur had arranged to charter a 60-foot ketch named Bluebelle. The vessel was older but seaworthy. It had a small galley, sleeping quarters below deck, and enough space for 7 people. The plan was to sail through the Bahamas for a week, stopping at various islands, then return to Florida. Arthur was confident. He had checked the weather. He had reviewed the boat. He trusted his skills. What he could not have anticipated was the other variable in the equation. The man hired to captain Bluebelle was Julian Harvey. He was 44 years old, lean, tanned, and articulate. His resume was impressive. He had flown B-24 bombers during World War II and earned the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal. After the war, he became a professional sailor and charter captain. He had crossed the Atlantic multiple times. He knew boats. Harvey's personal life was more complicated. He had been married 6 times. His current wife, Mary Dean, was his 6th. She was 34, attractive, and traveled with him on charters. The two had married only months before. Mary Dean had no extensive sailing experience, but she assisted Harvey with cooking and hospitality for guests. Terry Jo Duperrault met Harvey in Fort Lauderdale. Harvey presented himself as competent and experienced. There was no reason to doubt him. The contract was signed. The Duperrault family boarded Bluebelle on November 8, 1961. Harvey and Mary Dean welcomed them aboard. The boat left port that afternoon. For the first few days, the trip proceeded as planned. They sailed south into Bahamian waters. The children explored the boat. Jean helped with meals. Arthur took the helm when Harvey allowed it. The weather remained calm. There were no mechanical problems. By November 12, they were cruising northwest of Great Stirrup Cay, a small, uninhabited island in the Berry Islands chain. That night, the wind was light. The sea was flat. Dinner was served. The children were sent to bed early. Terry Jo went below deck to her bunk. The boat rocked gently. She fell asleep. Terry Jo Duperrault woke to the sound of stamping and screaming. It came from above deck. She did not know what time it was. The cabin was dark. She listened. The sounds were frantic, then muffled. Then there was silence. She got out of her bunk and moved toward the companionway. The boat felt wrong. It was listing slightly. There was water on the floor. She climbed partway up the ladder and stopped. Her brother, Brian, was lying on the deck. There was blood. He was not moving. Terry Jo did not scream. She stood, frozen. Then she heard footsteps. Captain Harvey appeared. His clothes were wet. He looked down at her. He said, "Get back down there." She obeyed. She went below. The water was rising. She saw her mother and younger sister in one of the cabins. They were not moving. There was blood there, too. She did not touch them. She did not call out. She stood in the rising water and tried to understand. The boat was sinking. She could feel it. The angle was wrong. More water was coming in. She moved toward the hatch again. Harvey was gone. She climbed onto the deck. Bluebelle was low in the water. The sails were down. There was a small cork and canvas float tied to the rigging. A life raft, barely large enough for one person. Terry Jo did not think. She climbed onto the float. The lines holding it came loose. The float drifted away from the sinking ketch. She turned and watched Bluebelle go down. It took less than a minute. The mast tilted, the hull slipped under, and then there was nothing but dark water. Terry Jo was alone. The float measured approximately 2.5 feet by 5 feet. It was made of cork wrapped in canvas with a small wooden frame. There were no oars, no sail, no storage compartments. It had been designed as an emergency flotation device, not a lifeboat. It was not meant to sustain life for long. Terry Jo sat on it. The surface was wet. The ocean around her was black. She could not see land. She could not see lights. The sky was overcast. There were no stars. She had no water, no food, no covering. She wore a light shirt and shorts. Her feet were bare. The float drifted. There was no way to steer it. The current took it where it would. The water was warm, but not comforting. It slapped against the sides of the float. Occasionally, a swell lifted it and set it down again. The motion was slow and constant. Terry Jo did not cry out. There was no one to hear. She sat still and waited. She did not know what else to do. As the hours passed, the sky began to lighten. Dawn came slowly. The sun rose, pale at first, then bright. It revealed the emptiness around her. In every direction, there was only water. The horizon was a flat line. No boats, no islands, no birds. The sun climbed higher. The heat increased. Terry Jo had no hat, no shade. The light reflected off the water and burned her skin. Her lips cracked. Her throat was dry. She had nothing to drink. She did not panic. She had been raised to be calm in difficulty. But the thirst was immediate and worsening. She licked her lips. She swallowed. It did not help. The day passed. The sun moved across the sky. Terry Jo sat motionless. She did not lie down. She did not thrash. She conserved what little energy she had. The float held her weight. It did not sink. That was all it could do. Time became difficult to measure. There was no clock, no way to mark the passage of minutes. The sun was the only reference. It rose, it peaked, it descended. Each phase felt longer than the last. Thirst became the dominant sensation. It overtook hunger, overtook fear. Her mouth was dry. Her tongue felt thick. Swallowing was painful. She knew she could not drink the seawater. She had been told that. She did not try. The sun burned her face, her shoulders, her legs. Her skin turned red, then began to blister. She had no way to shield herself. She sat with her head bowed, but the light was everywhere. It came from above and reflected from below. There was no escape. The ocean swells continued. They were not violent, but they were constant. The float rose and fell. Sometimes spray splashed over the edge. It soaked her clothes. The salt stung her skin. She did not wipe it away. There was no point. She thought about her family. She did not understand what had happened. She had seen her brother. She had seen her mother and sister. She knew they were not alive. But she did not know why. She did not know where her father was. She did not know where Captain Harvey had gone. She thought about rescue. She believed someone would come, but she did not know when. She did not know if anyone knew she was missing. She did not know if anyone was looking. The second night came. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up slightly. She shivered. Her clothes were still damp from the spray. She wrapped her arms around herself. She did not sleep. She could not. The float was too small, too unstable. If she lay down, she risked rolling off. She stayed upright. She watched the darkness. She waited. The second dawn came. The sun rose again. The heat returned. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her eyes were swollen. Her skin was raw. She had not eaten. She had not drunk. Her body was beginning to shut down. On the morning of November 13th, a man arrived at the Coast Guard station in Miami. He was soaking wet. He carried the body of a small girl. He identified himself as Captain Julian Harvey. He said his boat, Bluebelle, had sunk during the night. He said a sudden squall had caused the vessel to take on water. He said the mainmast had broken and punctured the hull. He said everyone aboard had been lost except for him and the little girl, Terry Jo Duperrault. He said he had tried to save the others, but the boat went down too quickly. Renee was dead. Harvey said she had died in his arms in the dinghy. He said he had drifted for hours before being picked up by a passing tanker. The Coast Guard took his statement. They launched a search operation. Aircraft and vessels were dispatched to the area northwest of Great Stirrup Key. They looked for survivors. They looked for debris. Harvey was questioned. His story was detailed but inconsistent. He said the squall had come without warning, yet weather reports showed calm conditions. He said the mast had broken, but he could not explain the mechanics. He said he had tried to save the family, but he was the only one who made it to the dinghy. He said Rennie had been alive when he found her, but she died shortly after. Investigators noted discrepancies. Harvey's clothes were not torn. His hands showed no sign of struggle. The dinghy he had used was in good condition, with oars and supplies intact. The little girl's body showed no sign of drowning. Her lungs were dry. Harvey was not arrested, but he was not cleared. He was told to remain available for further questioning. He checked into a motel in Miami. On the afternoon of November 13th, a maid found him in his room. He had cut his own throat and thigh arteries with a razor blade. He left no note. He died within minutes. Terry Jo was still adrift. By the second afternoon, Terry Jo could no longer sit upright consistently. She slumped forward. Her muscles were weak. Her skin was blistered and peeling. Her lips were split. She had not urinated in many hours. Her body was conserving what little fluid remained. Dehydration causes the blood to thicken. The heart must work harder. Blood pressure drops. The brain receives less oxygen. Confusion sets in. Vision blurs. Coordination fails. Terry Jo did not hallucinate, or, if she did not remember it later. She drifted in and out of awareness. Sometimes she opened her eyes and saw the sky. Sometimes she did not know where she was. The pain in her throat and mouth was constant. She could not swallow. She could not speak. The float continued to drift. The current carried it northwest, away from the site of the sinking. The search planes were looking in the wrong area. They were following Harvey's reported coordinates, which were inaccurate. Terry Jo was miles from where anyone expected her to be. The second night came again. She did not register it. She lay across the float, half-conscious. Her breathing was shallow. Her body temperature fluctuated. The ocean around her was indifferent. It neither helped nor harmed. It simply existed. She was dying. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. Her organs were beginning to fail. Without water, the human body can survive 3 to 5 days, depending on conditions. Terry Jo had been adrift for nearly 60 hours. She was at the edge. On the morning of November 13th, the Greek freighter Captain Theo was steaming northwest through the Bahamas. The vessel was en route from Europe to the Gulf Coast. The sea was calm. Visibility was good. At approximately 11:30 a.m., Captain Theo Theodorakis was on the bridge. He happened to glance toward the water off the starboard side. He saw something small and white, rising and falling with the swells. He thought it might be debris. He altered course slightly to investigate. As the freighter drew closer, he realized it was afloat, and there was someone on it. He ordered the engines stopped. A lifeboat was lowered. Crew members rowed to the float. They found a young girl, unconscious, severely sunburned, and dehydrated. She was lifted into the lifeboat and brought aboard the freighter. The ship's crew had no doctor, but they had basic medical supplies. They laid her in a bunk. They gave her water, small sips, carefully. Too much too quickly can cause shock. They covered her burns with ointment. They shaded her eyes. They did not know who she was. Terry Jo regained partial consciousness. She could not speak clearly. She did not know where she was. The crew radioed the Coast Guard. They reported finding a survivor, young, female, severely distressed. They gave their coordinates. The Coast Guard responded immediately. They dispatched a helicopter. Terry Jo was transferred from the freighter to the aircraft and flown to a hospital in Miami. She arrived in critical condition. Terry Jo Duperrault spent several days in the hospital. She was treated for dehydration, sunburn, and shock. She did not speak much at first. When she was strong enough, investigators came to interview her. She told them what she remembered. She described waking to screaming. She described the blood. She described Captain Harvey telling her to go back below. She described her mother and sister. She described the float. She described the hours on the water. Her testimony matched the physical evidence. Blood had been found in the wreckage of the dinghy Harvey had used. The Coast Guard had recovered debris from Bluebelle. The hull had not been punctured by a mast. It had been deliberately scuttled. Harvey had opened the seacocks. The investigation concluded that Julian Harvey had murdered the Duperrault family and his own wife. The motive was never definitively established. Some believed he intended to kill his wife and the family witnessed it. Others believed financial pressure or psychological instability drove him. He left no explanation. He had killed himself before he could be charged. Terry Jo was the sole survivor. She had not survived because of skill or preparation. She had survived because a Greek freighter happened to pass within visual range of a small cork float in the open ocean. The odds were remote, but they had been enough. She returned to Wisconsin. She was raised by relatives. She did not speak publicly about the incident for many years. In later life, she wrote about it. She described the silence of the ocean. She described the waiting. She described the moment she was pulled from the water. She did not describe herself as lucky. She described herself as someone who had been left behind and then found. The sea had held her. For 12 hours, it had neither saved her nor drowned her. It had simply kept her at the surface. And in the end, that had been enough.